Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spill the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today on November 10th, 2023, bringing you all the news you can use this week. I'm joining you from Barcelona. Cliff, I think you're joining from finally Florida this week, right?
Beautiful downtown St. Petersburg, Florida.
Gorgeous.
Not as nice as Barcelona.
We're not quite as nice, but I will say I've been on an airplane all night, so we'll trade on that one. And I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group. We're a research and advisory firm. And joining me today is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, we have been on the road nonstop for literally 8 weeks at this point, right? Like, I think we're somewhere in that 8 to 10 week range, I think, for this. But
That's
you're
right.
Finally home, right? You're home this week.
I just got home late last night from, actually, no sarcasm, beautiful Denver, Colorado. I was out there with 15.5. We'll talk about that a little later. And I think even if we just listed the towns we've been in those weeks, that would take up the entire podcast.
It would definitely. It's been a kind of an ongoing event after week conversation. So you just got back from, as you said, Denver. You were speaking on stage at the 15.5 Thrive conference, correct?
That's correct. In fact, I was going to go through this when we went through the news, but this seems like a good segue. They just released their HR outcomes flywheel, which was very prescient. And also, I don't know how directly based on our research, but definitely ties in to our Sapient Insights Group's research into how our HR actions affect business outcomes, HR outcomes, talent outcomes. They are fully bought into that and have created a model themselves to allow organizations to track what those effects are, which is very cool.
Very cool. Yeah, I know. I met with them at the HR Tech conference, and they had walked through some of their new management platform materials. And I think this flywheel concept sort of goes along with that. It's always cool, I think, to see what a lot of these organizations are, the work they're trying to put into sort of helping managers do a better job at managing with the tools they have. And that's a lot of what HR technology is. But I think oftentimes they think in terms of just more data, not sort of how to keep that process rolling for the managers, right? In a way that makes sense, which it sounds a little bit like 15.5 is doing with what they're trying to approach here. I know you were on site doing a panel there. Who else were you on the panel with that last week?
That panel involved Adam Weber, who also has a podcast. So you can hear that, listeners, on the HR Superstars podcast. That was a live recording, which we know very well is difficult to pull off. So props to them for managing that. And I was on there also with Jamie Conrad, who is the head of people at Trust Radius that does B2B software. I want to say connections, ratings. I'm sure she would be able to present it better. And talking about her efforts as an HR team of one through a very volatile time, really helping working directly with their CFO to really understand the impact financially of different HR programs and initiatives they had put in place.
Yeah, we say all the time, no matter how big or small your HR function is, your strategic role can have such a major impact, right? So that's a really great example of that. And always good to get a chance to sort of see in a conversation about how HR and how HR can be strategic, right? What kind of an impact that has for organizations. So very cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that it's pretty interesting because this whole idea of these frontline workers, managers, sort of these teams, it has become a bit of, I would say, a hidden theme that you and I have been discussing sort of behind the scenes and in these sort of moments. And I think it's one of the things that we sort of tapped into as a trend. And I think we're going to see it in a few of these news items today too, of HR for those workers.
I know there's so much news to cover, right? But a lot of it has to do with this frontline conversation, which I think that we've been having for quite some time. But it's a good theme, I think, to hone in on today. We also see a lot of conversations this week about artificial intelligence that obviously is top of mind for a lot of organizations. We're seeing some changes take place in our industry, which always tends to happen around this time of year. People start looking at new roles. You start to see people sort of, as they're getting ready for the new strategy, heading into it, right? Picking up new thinking about sort of leadership inside their organization. You see this both in our industry and other industries. So it's a chock full week of conversations and information. I know I just came off of the UKG Aspire conference and 2 full days of getting updates and briefings from the UKG executive team, including Chris Todd, as well as many of their new product strategy groups, including Hugo and many of the members that I hadn't had a chance to speak with previously on what's going on at the UKG, both in the sense of their technology, but also in the sense of their service. And so that was really a great opportunity we've talked quite a bit this year about what a lot of the smaller organizations are doing. And we've talked quite a bit about what sort of the larger organizations are doing to sort of at an HR enterprise conversation level. What's interesting is looking at UKG as you are seeing them sort of really come into their own as one of the bigger players in the HR technology market, right? For many years, Ultimate was squarely one of the top performers in what was the SMB mid-market space, right? Kronos for many years was the top time and attendance workforce management solution for large global organizations, large industry-specific organizations in manufacturing and healthcare and other industries that they were highly tailored in. And now those two entities have really spent time coming together, and now they are offering solutions that I think are on par or really starting to meet the needs of those large global complex organizations. So I think you're going to be hearing a lot more from UKG on that multinational global organization. And that's definitely what we heard this week is that that partnerships are still important to them. They're going to continue to do partnerships wherever it makes sense for their customers and for their partners as well. But they're stepping into with the new UKG Pro product, which is the combined efforts of their solutions really into that sort of 5,000, 10,000 plus audience, right? As that their solution now with the new OneView payroll solution that they've got that includes the acquisition they made earlier this year of the international payroll company out of Ireland, as well as it includes the work that they've been investing in around sort of the messaging around artificial intelligence, but also the use of artificial intelligence inside of the system. The new Flex layer that they've built, right? That they had talked about a little bit when you and I were there last year, as that Flex layer has allowed them to sort of provide the microservices model that we've seen the other big players put in place so they could really get to the data faster, move that data around the various modules faster, those kind of things. They've now got a new PaaS, platform as a service, along with that Flex model. They're getting ready to develop low-code development tools on top of that platform as well. All of those things, I think, put them in a league that really means their tool can or has the capability to expand to the needs of these large multinational organizations. So, and that was the big message for me this week was that they're ready to step up and service organizations who have some of the most complex needs in the market. The other thing that I think this week at the UKG conference that we've heard loud and clear is they've invested heavily in updating their service model to have a more cohesive environment where you have basically a support team that follows you from rapid needs all the way through to the small needs, and a group of people who sort of understand your organization's individual work so that you're basically, even if you're talking to someone who's an expert in learning or an expert in time management or an expert in the infrastructure conversations, now it's a team-based model so that you won't be losing information passing from one question to the other. So that's really good to see. And that's already starting to impact their service delivery numbers. And then the thing that I was most excited about is that they were doubling down on their investment in the industry-specific conversations, where they're really going to be focusing on healthcare as well as the manufacturing space, frontline workers, probably a better way to put it, space like we were just talking about, building a lot of new technology with their AI investment around that. And they really emphasized their Google partnership through that they were leveraging the Google platform as their primary partner in AI. And what was really nice, which I thought was important, is they did not spend a lot of time focusing on what we call generative AI, which everybody's been talking about, but on the total AI package that they're working with Google on, and the fact that they've been working on it for about 12 years from their timeline, right? I think everybody's been trying to show they've been working on AI for quite some time. But that with Google, their goal is to use artificial intelligence where it makes sense in the most common sense way and in the most secure way that's possible for their customers. And so with that, they rolled out a really new, what they're considering sort of their cultural commentary, right? And I think that's going to carry them through. And their big focus is on ethics and the right technology for companies around the globe. The only other thing I think that's worth kind of mentioning from this event, because it was a really exciting, I think, opportunity to see them bring together. I think they had over 5,000 people who were at their event, which was pretty big for them. And the big change, I think, in that UKG ready category. Now, Cliff, you and I have talked a lot about UKG ready.
Right.
So basically what UKG has done is they have basically two main solutions that they're selling to their audiences. UKG Pro services really everyone previously above 200 employees and up within organizations. But the big change now is they're going to move that UKG ready number to 500 employees. So basically from 500 down to the smallest company size, they have UKG ready, which has all of the capabilities and time and attendance and payroll and solutions and tools specifically tailored towards that SMB market. And with the range, I think it was us and several other analysts who kind of said, look, you're stopping at 200 is a little too small for your UKG ready audience. We're seeing this tool used effectively at 500. And they said it took a lot of work to sort of reframe all the thinking in their organizations and make sure that everybody from a sales all the way down to the marketing team and to the production team and the development team sort of understood what that might mean for them. But that was one of the big changes they made from last year to this year, was that UKG ready would be the primary solution for organizations 500 below. Now, granted, if someone is growing fast, or they might need some of the more complex capabilities that you find in UKG Pro, they will obviously sell to different audiences. It's not a black and white conversation for them. But I do think that it is something that's worth noting, that they're going to really heavily emphasize that market and doing work with that market. And then UKG Pro will be 500 and above, and they're emphasizing sort of how all these markets are working together and how their sales teams can support them. So that was a big announcement for them as well. That was, I think, worth having some conversations about. So Cliff, you and I have been on different ends of the continent sort of talking about things. And now I'm over at Barcelona. I'll be talking next week. I'll have updates on what we're doing at Workday Rising EMEA, because I've been here getting ready to start that event this week. But that doesn't even begin to count the number of conversations we have going on with just the things that are happening in the industry to talk about. How many different topics do we have this week? I think we have like 10, right?
I ran out of fingers and toes, to be honest.
Yeah.
And sort of a peek behind the curtain for those of you listening. Basically, what will happen is Stacey will find something interesting. Usually, both of us kind of have alerts set up, or obviously we're going to a lot of these meetings. But Stacey has been working overtime despite all that traveling. I will say that this is the most news items you sent me. Now, this also happens this time of year as we're sort of wrapping up the calendar year, but still, there is a lot to get through. I'm very amazed by this. But you had mentioned sort of both sort of frontline workers and different industry specific things. And I think that's a pretty good segue into one of the bigger news items, which is P. I would say interesting to me because actually at a very short period of time, I worked construction when the economy crashed back in 2008, 2010, sort of wanted to sort of start writing professionally. So I did some work in construction. So I'd always love to see them represented. And ADP has launched their HCM solution specifically targeted for the construction industry, was the big sort of news. So
this is interesting because ADP has had some minor sort of investments in verticals, but nothing really focused, right? Some of their time and attendance, they've really tailored on various industry, right? Some of the various modules they've put out, they've tailored on certain industries. But this is an interesting take on a certain and very specific industry. Now, one of the things I will say is that this is an industry, I think, that has a lot of needs on a small business side, right? We know that there's thousands and thousands of small business construction organizations. They have a lot of needs for HR because of the compliance and the report regulations and the safety and all that stuff. And it's also an industry where we haven't seen some of the other sort of big HR names take on ownership of this industry and say, we're going to create specialized tools for this. Probably one of the only ones I think might be someone like a Workforce Software because they have highly compliance driven time and attendance. Sometimes we'll see them pop up in this area, but much more on the much larger side than the SMB space of this. But really the one that we see in our data most often is probably Deltek. So Deltek is a project management tool, and they've added some HR components to their solution that oftentimes gets brought into our survey, and people will put a percentage of sort of what they're using inside of the Deltek platform around this. But this is really kind of a wide open space. And I think ADP could really do something interesting here. I mean, Cliff, like you said, it's an industry that has a lot of requirements and governance. From what we're seeing from ADP, and we haven't had a chance to talk with them, but do you feel there's enough unique needs there to make an industry specific tool valid in this space?
I do. I think there's first you have payroll. Depending on the type of construction, you're going to have a lot of different unions represented. And ADP, I would say, has the ability to handle all those complex regulations, right? That's something they've prided themselves on for quite some time. And the other thing is dealing with OSHA, which is very specific to construction. That's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And I realize that's just an American one, but other countries also have different boards that are set up specifically for construction and safety. And they have their own compliance regulations involving things like being able to take breaks and the types of equipment that are needed and certification. So I do think it is an industry that probably has not received the attention it should. And I think ADP, with their reach and their previous experience working in these sort of complex payroll situations and compliance situations, is suited to be able to do that.
Yeah, and we should note that this is their ADP Workforce Now application that they're sort of putting towards this, but tailored toward the construction site. And they definitely mention things like job costing and union management and managing multiple projects, which is, again, right up the aisle of what we see Deltek oftentimes saying that the differentiator in their solution. So I think this is interesting for ADP to really go in a direction that is going to provide a level of capability for a lot of these organizations that they just may not have had available on the HR side of things in the past, right?
That's right. And kind of speaking of expansions, and you'd also mentioned AI earlier, Docebo, the learning company, has had an acquisition just in this last couple months here, but started coming to fruition, and that is of Adugo, which, no shame if you haven't heard of them, but they are an AI sort of forward learning technology that will now be adapted into the Docebo platform, sort of across the board, which reminds me of what you were just saying about UKG, right? That the smarter play often with AI is to have it as an accelerator of existing processes rather than a sort of standalone generative product.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting here with Docebo is that this solution doesn't seem to be bringing any one big change to the Docebo platform. As you noted, it is really just sort of, I think, taking probably the expertise of the people inside that organization, as well as some of the already developed sort of learning management system solutions that have been built around the AI tool sets, and figuring out how they're probably going to fit them into the existing Docebo platform. One of the things they kind of mentioned in this, which I think is really interesting, is the expansion of Docebo Shape. So that's the creation of their sort of e-learning course content sort of management and development tool. And I think one of the things that Docebo does uniquely different in the market right now from the other LMSs that we monitor and watch and are big in the space, and there's not a lot of them anymore, a lot of small ones, not a lot of big ones left in the market, is they really have kind of doubled down on this content creation conversation, right? And I think that is one of the unique things that a lot of people really, I just talked to one of the organizations who delivers some of the largest numbers of training for the financial markets, and they use Docebo from that perspective, right? Even though they're using other LMSs. And so I think this is going to be interesting over the next, I think, probably year to 2 years in the learning space, because learning is right now the most expensive thing is content. And will the AI conversation change the content conversation, the creation conversation? And when it does, will it change the costing and the pricing around it? And I don't know the answer to that. I hope in some cases that people realize that learning requires really solid, not just subject matter expertise, but thinking about how those objectives are achieved on the learner side, which means you really do have to have someone who's going beyond just putting content there, but also putting series of assessments and series of activities and series of on-the-job learning things. That's what a real good instructional designer does, is they think about how someone's going to acquire the skill, not just read a piece of paper or listen to a video. But I do think this is a market where we're going to see a lot of the content conversation, which we just saw come about in the Actors Guild, where they just resolved the union dispute. Who owns the IP of a lot of the people who are creating this content, right? So,
yeah, that's a good. I actually did not realize that had happened. So look at that.
Yeah.
Keeping an eye on the American news. I know the WGA had finished a while back, but that does remind me, though, because as you mentioned that, the company they picked up is Edugo.ai. And I just recently found out as well, speaking of sort of related news, that anytime it's a .ai, that's actually a country suffix for the domain. And that is for the British territory of Anguilla. And there's been some news reports that actually, because of this interest in that domain name, it now has taken up somewhere near 10%, or now accounts for 10% of that small island country's GDP. So it's one of these little side effects of the world we're in.
Of having just a .ai as your country suffix. Wow, I had no clue on that. That is, okay, you guys can all take that one to your next party conversation. Is, did you know what the .ai was, right? That's an interesting one. I mean, but that's what's happening, right? This is what we call AI fever, right? It's a bit of that. Everybody's kind of jumping on this bandwagon to some extent. But we're also seeing everyone, as they're doing it, really talking a lot about learning AI. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, UKG was very open about this, is that they're now basically providing for their entire organization development and training in the AI space, right? That was really interesting to hear at their conference, that they're being very upfront about, we're on this journey with our customers around how to best utilize AI together. And our most important thing is make sure our employees are updated on all of these. And that was, I'm sure it's happening in almost every organization, but I hadn't heard an executive talk at that level about what organizations are doing with it, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's pretty interesting because it's still probably one of the bigger interest items from our recent report from the HR Systems Survey, which you can get from our website if you want to check that out. But that how few organizations have really set a formal plan in place to manage AI sort of ethically and to sort of just have structure around the use of that.
Yeah, I think that the more organizations, and we've got some data in the report this year on what is the difference between a strategic HR function and how they're handling artificial intelligence, both in HR and for their company versus those who are not. And that was probably some of the most distinct different, the unique things, because we asked people what were sort of all the things they were doing in the organization around artificial intelligence. And that I think we'll start to see basically come out some positive, promising practices, as we call them, right? In this space where people should be sort of spending some time. One of the other conversations I know we were going to have was this new interesting EY and IBM teaming up to automate AI for HR processes. This is, I think, a little bit of where we are probably going to see some of this AI conversation going, right? Which is the idea that it is as much about a service as it is a technology right now, right? Like any new emerging technology ends up being a mixture of, because someone's got to figure out how to use it, got to sort of build it into your existing platforms. And so this combination of IBM providing what is underneath the backbone of what's their Watson technology, right? With E&Y, Ernst & Young, basically putting forth for workforce-based questions and problems, the services needed to embed AI into those organizations. Those two together are offering sort of this sort of shared conversation. And they're using Microsoft, OpenAI, Dell Technologies, IBM, SAP. They're using sort of all these different technologies that they've been leveraging for quite some time to sort of embed this for their customers. I mean, Cliff, when it comes to the services side of the industry, we know that's not valued as much in the stock market space, right? As pure technology is. But do you feel like this is it feels a little bit to me like what we saw in the analytics and planning space, right? Where they can't have the conversation about technology without having the conversation about the services side of how you get it into your company, right?
No, that's a perfect analogy, because it's exactly what's happening, is that when you have a new technology, as we were just saying, sometimes there isn't a formal plan in place. And because you don't know exactly how everything's going to work or what the best usage of. And so you look to see, how can this be helped? We as an organization in this hypothetical situation want to use this new tech. We understand this could be a competitive differentiator, but how do we do it? We don't want to just jump into something that could, cause more problems than it solves. So what do? Well, you look for services, and some of the things that they're talking about doing are not new skills or new jobs or new tasks, such as writing JDs or extracting payroll reports or analyzing surveys, right, for sentiment analysis. And the tech is there, we know, because we talk about this. But that's one thing to say, the tech's there, but then how do we do it, right? And so that's what this EY.AI, there it is again, will be doing, is they will have the tech, but they'll walk you through, like, this is how you do it. These are, as you say, those sort of promising practices. That's our term. Don't try and steal that, EY. And to go through and show you how to not just pull those reports, but understand what they mean and how to extract the right information and how to best use and leverage this tech. And I think this is key. And when you look at these names, right? One of the big four in EY and IBM, I'm sure we've all heard of them. So clearly, this is not just like, oh, let's just throw this dart and see where it lands. This is companies that understand that there's a lot of opportunity here. And I think this just proves that, again, AI is not like, let's say, virtual reality or something where it's like, okay, that's interesting. Let's see what happens. No, this is happening. So, and it's pretty interesting to see, as you said, those services supporting the tech or coming alongside the tech as a viable sort of product line, if you want to think of it like that, or another line of business. So, I find it fascinating. So,
I mean, I think, and then the next couple conversations we had here really are to understand that this is almost a journey you don't want to take alone, whether you work with your HR provider, whether you have a consulting firm like EY or Deloitte, IBM, or you have a small consulting firm, maybe that understands this specifically for your area. This is an area where it is important to maybe get some expert help on this, because there's a lot going on, like our next conversation about what's happening with large language models and propagating race-based medicine, right? Like, these are and you said you got this from Holger, right? This conversation?
Yeah, Holger brought it up, I think, on LinkedIn. That's a shout out to Holger Mueller. Always wonderful and delightful. Just a charming man. No, he is great. I really like Holger.
You're just upset because he keeps picking on you, because there's a beef between the two of you about how often you get to the gym when you guys are at conferences.
He's a fitness nut, and he's, like I said, he's shaming me into being a healthier person. So I can't fault him too much. But this actually comes from nature. So that's really cool. I love seeing it when we obviously need to be involved in our industry, but it is part of a broader conversation. And this actually came up in an article that he linked to, showing how these large language models can, despite their opportunity and their sort of promise to help combat bias, can sometimes do the opposite. And this was in medicine, basically in the healthcare setting, showing that by using these large language models, rather than sort of filtering out these biases and stereotypes, they were using existing information coming in, right? And then it would just be perpetuated, these sort of racial sort of, I don't want to say stereotype, more like filtering, right? Where certain diagnoses and certain equations were being propagated so that only certain people were receiving or being pushed towards certain treatments based on sort of very outdated assumptions.
Well, yeah, the exact thing here was that the recent studies using large language models have demonstrated their utility in answering medically relevant questions. So that's the whole point. These LLMs, that they're kind of great in that understanding the language, right? But in specialties such as cardiology, anesthesia, oncology, those were pushing basically bad data and bad responses to patients because they were being based off of this biased data set that was fed into them. And again, the most important thing to understand about it was interesting. We had this great conversation at the UKG conference with the head of AI integration partnership with Google. And we have this, that the whole room was sort of going back and forth about different things that was going on with AI. And he clearly said, I think everybody gets this, that what you're seeing with these large language models, they've all been built off of what's going on in the internet. It's reflecting back to us who we are on the internet. And so you have to be aware of that, right? And that propagation. And even if it's using other databases, it's still being built off of who we are and our understandings for years and years. So the most important thing I think about any AI that you're using is, one, running parallel models next to it is the one thing we know really is important. So don't just do AI, do a parallel process that is run by another source or another tool or yourself, right? From a human perspective. So you can see like how different are the outcomes coming in. And the second thing is understanding that you have to have the ability over time to tweak that data set, to put inside of it to weigh the factors, understanding the biases that came in with it, right? Which I think is a really scary thing for a lot of people who design these tools right now.
Yeah. You mentioned the scary thing. Actually, one of the links that you sent me was from what's become, I think, one of our favorite sort of cartoonists. That was, obviously it was around Halloween time when this was created, but it's a carving of a pumpkin with a horrified face on it with the caption that it's the look my parents get whenever someone brings up what AI will do to their jobs. So absolutely love it. But it's interesting too, because it then goes on to talk about some research from marketers that around 64%, strangely, I think that's the same percentage of people or organizations that we found that either didn't have or don't know if they have an ethical AI policy. Very odd. But 64% of marketers feared that AI will replace their jobs. I always find these stats interesting, especially when juxtaposed with the amount of people who use AI at their jobs. Right? You'll see these like, 64% of people are afraid. How many people use AI in their jobs? 80%. It's like, okay, well, interesting. So,
yeah, I thought this one was, and by the way, this is the Market Tunist, which is market and which is spelled market and then ONIST. Look him up. His cartoons are great. They make me laugh every time I see them. So if you want to find someone that's, I think, hitting all cylinders when it comes to what's happening in our Tom Fishburne is actually the name of the gentleman who writes these cartoons. But I thought he also does this great article on sort of what's happening in the marketing space. And I'm a big proponent of if you really want to see the cutting edge of almost anything, you look at marketing and sales, because that's always the place where a lot of money gets invested first. And they're definitely on this sort of frontier of, is AI going to take over my job, right? But the other thing I think that they were very, which I thought was an interesting thing, is that it also showed that there was a lot of creativity, that production creativity, right, that could see boosted almost a 40% in business problem solving, right, when you're using something like a GPT-4 or something along those lines. And then what was interesting was there was a 23% drop in performance because the output reduced the diversity of thought by like 41%. So there's these differing things that are happening, right? We're optimizing work, but now we're removing all the human elements that maybe made our world a little unique from the next companies. And I think every executive is going to really have to balance that as they're making these decisions. It's going to be the most exciting thing to reduce workloads, right? To reduce the amount of work that people have to do. We were just talking about burnout at the UKG conference, and Simmers from Forrester is doing a big article on this. And I think it's absolutely, important to understand that there's a lot of burnout. People are feeling like they're overwhelmed in their jobs. But when you take the human element out of some of those processes and you make them more optimized, you do lose some of the very interesting unique things that humans would add to it, like thinking like maybe there was a different way to do the process instead of just optimizing it, right? So those are interesting commentaries on it, right?
Yeah. So I know we are actually we've gone through quite a bit and we still have a lot of news stories. Stacey, how do you feel about doing a sort of lightning round of some of these news stories we've got?
I think it's a good idea. Yeah. Because otherwise we're going to be here for another 30 minutes. And I know we're at our half hour mark already today.
Yeah.
So probably a good idea. I'll let you run through them and then maybe we'll pick and choose.
Give me some quick thoughts on a few of these things. I'm going to start with, since we were already talking about ChatGPT, I just want to bring up a news story that ChatGPT has released GPTs. That's just GPT with a little S at the end, right? Which are sort of little custom versions of ChatGPT that you can use for your own sort of needs, right? Make it a little more highly specialized.
Yeah, this one I think is interesting. Everyone should probably go take a look at this because this is a low code model around introducing GPTs. They've basically created already pre-built, for the most part, right? Like already pre-built queried GPTs that then you can add on to. And so this is the idea that now they're going to make it easier for organizations who want to do writing or organizations who want to do laundry buddy, right? Like these are little services that people who have figured out how to ask the right questions and do the right queries, they can bundle that up and say, now I'm going to send that to you so you can do it on your own, right? And you don't have to go through the hours I spent of figuring out the right query to get this answer. It'll be interesting to see how this goes, but I think it's worth people taking a look at, because this is actually what a lot of the HR function communities are doing, is that they're building this out, where they basically pre-done all the queries and all you're doing is sort of picking the one that's going to give you the best option, right?
Yep. Very much so. So little swerve, but just as we're talking about the kind of news that's happening, Atlas and Coursera are partnering. Coursera, you may already know. They're a big learning platform. Atlas, you may not know, but they are an EOR. And so they're going to be working together, creating a product, Atlas Learning, so that you have the ability to sort of reach all of your talent, even if they are talent that's through an EOR. I find that pretty interesting, Stacey, because we end up talking a lot about different employment models here. And I just like to see that those workers, those sort of contingent workers or outside workers, are able to get these sort of opportunities.
Yeah, this is important because a lot of regulations around the country feel that if you are not directly employing someone, you don't have the right to sort of train or guide their work, not all, but some regions. And this is that employer record model providing training for those audiences. So I think it's a really powerful partnership there. Yeah.
And speaking of sort of expansions and reaching into new areas, LinkedIn will have CRM Connect, which will provide sort of reliable, as they say, this is their terms, I'm not endorsing it. They'll provide reliable candidate insights. So pretty interesting. That will be available starting in 2024, sort of allowing LinkedIn Recruiter to connect and integrate with various different CRM systems. And just to me, this is just another story showing how much Microsoft really believes in the HR space and HR tech as a whole. And again, it's just more connection across different business units.
Yeah, this one, they will be surfacing data in your CRM from the LinkedIn environment. I think this is probably huge for the recruiting community. That this will actually probably have an impact on some of the tools that are doing some of the scraping and integration, right? So I think this is an end around some of those tools that are doing that sort of middle ground right now. So, but I do think that LinkedIn is trying very hard to make sure that as a recruiting tool, their platform stays on top. I think the next conversation they're going to have is how do we continue to get more people into the system, right? But yeah, it's an interesting component.
Yeah, and speaking of LinkedIn Recruiter, OpenAI had its first developer event, and there were some very specific things that came out of that for recruiters. So using sort of ChatGPT, that's the OpenAI's big product that we know, but using AI to help with job descriptions, you'll be able to get sort of more input to help create content generation. But you can also build your own sort of, as we were kind of talking about with that GPTs, build your own, as they call it, like recruiter GPT or job description GPT as a couple examples, and then monetize that, right? So you can make your own products that you find helpful and then put it up on OpenAI's store. So again, this just AI revolution keeps chugging along. And that is also related to something that's very specific to us here at Sapient Insights Group, which was what I find horrifying, but I think they found exciting headline, which is this AI bot fills out job applications for you while you sleep. Exciting for a lot of people. They use the lazy apply bot as an example for how it can help you fill out all these job applications and really get the numbers you need. But Stacey, your first thought, and as soon as you said it to me, mine as well, was, oh God, survey responses.
Yeah. So we've been dealing, and I think one of the things you really have to, if you're in this industry, if we're doing research and doing surveys out in the market, and especially if you're using a wide swath, there are a lot of people who have created bots to fill out surveys, and they've gotten so much more sophisticated over the years. We've talked a little bit about this. Tammy Smith, who is our data analyst in this space, has talked about, I think, with you and her on past STTs, spilling tea on NHR Tech conversations. But what was interesting here is that we and our surveying tool have created a lot of different ways to sort of spot those, because they're getting more and more sophisticated. I mean, they're pulling information from like our intro language or from our stuff and putting it into the comments to make it look like it's a human being answering the response. And the goal for many of them is to get opportunities to be put into our award prizes, but we're pretty good at spotting them based off of our validation and cleaning process. But what we're finding here with this example was they were talking about like tens of thousands of people sort of basically using spamming bots to put resumes into the boxes across the world on different positions that are open. And it was interesting because this was a real good conversation, I think, on the whole recruiting space, is that we're going to see a lot more just people applying for jobs, but the quality of the applications is going to be going down. And that's what we're seeing already with this kind of a technology, right?
Yeah, and it's amazing because that is an area where we really see the need for human oversight, because it's like a bot can't spot a bot, right?
Yeah.
It really requires human. I imagine I have this sort of mental image of Tammy, as you mentioned, and like her team in this sort of dystopian Terminator-esque future of defeating these apply bots. But in a more happy news, Figures, which is a big comp management, comp analysis program out of Europe. So for our European listeners, you might know them. Americans may not be as familiar. They are creating or have created Pay Predict as a product, which will allow you to get a hopefully accurate salary estimate directly from LinkedIn profiles to help you kind of create better job offers or get a better understanding of what someone might be looking for based on their own information and integrating that with what they can pull from LinkedIn profiles.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Whether or not the data is accurate or as correct as not, there's been comments on the person who sort of posted this out as to, I just didn't give anywhere near where my salary range would be, right? But I think we'll see more of this idea of sort of the flip side of Predict. Now that pay transparency is really big and everyone has a lot of postings out in the market about what the actual pay is for these positions, although there are a lot of organizations who still haven't quite figured out that they can't get around that regulation. And we're seeing some lawsuits around it already because they've been trying to sort of say, well, it's from $500 to $200,000. You can't do that, by the way. It doesn't work. Lawsuits abound on that. But the other side of that is that, if I want to actually go and target people for my position, I do need to have some understanding of what kind of salary range they might have. And again, using benchmarking is a great way to do that. But if it's a person I don't know all of their background, maybe they don't have as much information publicly available as others, this tool supposedly will be leveraging other resources and ways to do it to give you a sense of that person's salary range before you reach out to them. It'll be interesting to see how accurate it is, but I think we're going to get a lot more of that sort of talent outreach conversation versus sort of just what's coming in the door and trying to slim it down to the most important respondents, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have a couple sort of people news, but the last thing I want to mention is I was able to talk to Appcast just yesterday. And Stacey, you mentioned services. Perfect point here is that Appcast has actually created a new service, Brandon Creative, as they're calling it, through Appcast, that, again, taking these ideas of we have the ability to do recruitment marketing, and we can help you with our software and new AI enablements, but also just our knowledge. And but we can help you here with services. So that could be employer branding, helping you develop your sort of brand and EVP, actually helping create designs, but again, based on their sort of data and what they know from their analytics and their own experience to help you actually create physical designs and the look and feel. And they also do DE&I strategy. So again, providing more than just a couple buttons to click, but using their knowledge and their past acquisitions of talent and organizations and their own experiences to launch that product. So pretty interesting stuff from them over there. And then finally, speaking of people, as I mentioned, we have Fuel 50 has a new president and chief revenue officer. We've known Fuel 50 for quite some time, Stacey. So
yeah, this one, Ann Fulton, we've known for years. She's done an amazing job with Fuel 50, which for those who might not know who Fuel 50 is, they are a sort of, in the newer terms, they're a
internal mobility.
Internal mobility and coaching and mentoring tool and performance from the sort of direction of developing skills within your organization. So they have a lot of skills connotation. They've really centered on that, what is sort of the new world of experience and engagement and understanding the needs of your employees for growth and career management inside the organization. So they're one of the few tools that we would say is tailored on that career management side. But what's interesting is that I know Joe Mills, and who is a co-founder, and Ann Fulton have really split the responsibilities for years across the two of them. And it just looks like they have promoted Joe Mills to the new promoted to president. And Ann Fulton put a really nice context out about sort of the change and how excited they are about the movement forward of what's going on with Fuel 50. And I think this is going to be exciting to see what Joe sort of does in her first step into this new role.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then we have the news from SAP SuccessFactors that Dan Beck will be their new president and chief product officer.
Yeah, this takes on, so again, I think if you're watching the industry, Meg Bear had stepped down, took a bit of sabbatical, and then basically is sort of trying to decide kind of what her next move is in her career. And Dan Beck has sort of stepped into her role, and he's with the title of President and Chief Product Officer for SAP SuccessFactors. And Dan, most recently, he's got a long career in this industry. He's worked for a lot of other organizations. He had worked for several years over at Workday. He had started his own company not too long ago with a product focused on contingent workforce labor and talent management, sold that solution just in the last year and a half. And now I think this is his next step in the industry. And what I'm kind of excited to see is, does he take some of those lessons he learned as a small business owner and as sort of the contingent labor conversation and some of the other organizations that he's worked with to really understand the customer needs of the SAP SuccessFactors market and the opportunities that market has. Because again, as one of the three big suppliers of enterprise level HR technology that is connected to ERP environments, SAP SuccessFactors has been doing a lot of infrastructure changes. But I think this is a moment where they're ready to start to talk more about sort of how they're going to tie all those infrastructure changes into new products and new technology in a way that maybe we haven't seen previously. So I think it's an exciting time for Dan to be taking over.
Yeah, it is. This is just an exciting time in general, as I'm sure the listeners have noticed. This is why you can't let us go to HR Tech, listeners. I mean, we have to, but we miss a week. We've got a lot to talk about, even with the lightning round. I know we're coming up to an hour. So, Stacey, thank you so much for finding all of this information. I know I had some to add in there too, but a lot of work. And I know that you're doing that while also traveling. So much appreciated. And I think we made it through there. So
we did.
Thank you to you, and thank you to our listeners. I don't think we've ever had anyone write in and complain about the length, but we are aware you've got other things to listen to, like repeats of this podcast or other HR Huddle podcasts.
Yes, we will apologize for the extra length this week, but we think there's just a lot of news going on, and we didn't want to sort of miss some of it that we think is relevant to helping you make decisions in your organization. But if there is any of the information that you want to see, we link to all of it here in this description. We also post some of the information on our LinkedIn post. So look up Cliff Stevenson on LinkedIn or myself, and you'll see the podcast LinkedIn information. So all these articles will be linked there, as Cliff always does. Also, if you're interested in finding some of the details that we talked about, our full annual HR system survey white paper report. Please note that it is now available for download and purchase off of our website. We have lots of organizations clamoring for the information we know. It is really one of the best that we've put out in the last couple of years. I'm really excited to see how we're going to continue to expand on it. So let us know if you have any questions about that content or want to access any conversations about how that content is going to impact your organization. Also, be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by CEO Terry Zipper. These HR Huddle episodes. And if you like the work that we're doing here, both in the Spilling the Tea on HR Tech as well as in our HR Huddle, HR We Have a Problem podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe. That's really important to making sure that we keep the audiences growing for this event and making sure we continue to know what's really working and not working. Stay up to date with immediate breaking HR Tech news and get all the behind the scenes content. You can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn or Twitter. And just to wrap up, we're saying thank you as well, Cliff, to always sort of keeping me on track. I know I keep sending all the conversation. You keep looking it up and saying, here's how we're going to talk about it this week because there's so much going on. Thanks to our production team, Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by the amazing founder, Kelly, and to our marketing team, Lisa and Summer. Both of them make sure that all this gets out to you guys and posted in a way that you guys can access. Couldn't do this without them. Also, thanks to our listeners and our listening community. We couldn't do this without you. If there are specific things you'd like to make sure we're covering, be sure to let us know. But that's it. We have run through a lot of information in maybe more than a short amount of time, for a little bit longer time. But for this episode, we want to wrap it up. Thanks, everyone. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR tech updates and insights. Bye, everyone.